Look up at the stars tonight. Really look at them. Those same stars hung over our ancestors 300,000 years ago, when the first humans who looked exactly like us walked the African plains. They had our brains, our bodies, our capacity for thought. And for most of that time, they left almost nothing behind. That is a mystery worth thinking about as you settle in tonight. Here is a mystery that should keep you awake, or perhaps let you drift off wondering. Modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago. We invented writing and built cities only about 5,000 years ago. That leaves a gap of roughly 295,000 years. Almost 300 millennia of human existence, with almost no record of what we did. What were our ancestors doing all that time? If you are watching this late at night, settling in for sleep, this is perfect company for those quiet hours. These mysteries have waited thousands of generations. They can wait a few more hours while you drift off. Subscribe and stick around. Think about what that gap means. Anatomically modern humans, people with brains the same size as yours, with the same capacity for language and abstract thought, walked this planet for over 100,000 years. They left almost no clear evidence of complex civilization before the last few thousand years. Why did it take so long? What were they doing? These questions have puzzled researchers for decades. The honest answer is we do not know. But what we have found in recent decades paints a picture far more fascinating than simple primitive survival. Our ancestors were doing things that challenge every assumption we had about prehistoric humanity. They were making art, creating music, developing sophisticated tools, and perhaps most remarkably, they were thinking abstractly in ways we once believed only modern civilizations could achieve. Along the southern coast of South Africa, there is a cave called Blombos. It sits on a cliff overlooking the Indian Ocean, a modest opening in the rock that prehistoric humans called home at various times. They occupied this shelter over more than 100,000 years. What archaeologists found there changed our understanding of when human minds became truly modern. The discoveries were remarkable. In 2018, researchers announced the discovery of a small stone fragment bearing a drawing made with red ochre. The design shows 9 lines deliberately traced in a crosshatch pattern. Dating revealed this drawing to be approximately 73,000 years old. That makes it the oldest known drawing by a human being. It predates European cave art by at least 30,000 years. Our ancestors in Africa were creating symbolic art, while Europe remained empty of modern humans. They were thinking abstractly, expressing themselves through marks on stone, but the drawing was not alone. The same cave layers yielded shell beads carefully drilled and strung together as jewelry. These beads date back approximately 75,000 years. The shells were not local to the area. They came from a specific species of sea snail, deliberately selected for their size and shape, pierced with bone tools and strung together. Someone chose those shells with intention. Even more remarkably, researchers found what appears to be a complete paint-making workshop dating back 100,000 years. 2 abalone shells filled with red ochre pigment, along with all the tools needed to grind and mix it. Seal bone for adding fat to the mixture. Charcoal for binding the pigments. This was evidence of early chemistry and forward planning. These people understood that different substances could be combined to create something new. What does this tell us? Our ancestors were not simply surviving, they were creating. They were making decorative objects that had no practical survival value. They were developing symbolic thinking, the ability to let one thing represent another. A bead is not just a shell. It becomes beauty, status, identity. This is the cognitive foundation of language, of art, of everything that makes us human. Once minds could treat symbols as reality, everything changed. And here is where it gets truly strange. For most of human prehistory, stone tools changed incredibly slowly. A hand axe from 300,000 years ago looks almost identical to one from 100,000 years ago. Same basic design, same manufacturing technique, century after century, millennium after millennium. The technology was effective, but essentially static. Innovation moved at a pace we can barely comprehend today. Different continents, different human populations, hundreds of thousands of years apart, and the technology remained essentially frozen. Compare that to the last 10,000 years, where we went from stone tools to smartphones. Something was different about how our ancestors thought and learned. Then around 70,000 years ago, everything began to change. Archaeologists call this the cognitive revolution or behavioral modernity. The archaeological record suddenly explodes with innovation. Sophisticated stone blades appear, manufactured using techniques that require years of training to master. Bone tools show up for the first time. The pace of change accelerated dramatically compared to the previous hundreds of thousands of years. Fish hooks, sewing needles, awls for working leather. These were not random creations. Archaeological sites separated by hundreds of miles show identical tool designs. This is not coincidence or independent invention. This is transmission. People teaching other people exactly how to make specific tools. Information was flowing between communities in ways it never had before. Ideas were spreading. Knowledge was accumulating across generations. A clever individual could figure out a better way to make a spear point, teach it to their children and neighbors. Within a few decades, everyone in the region would be using the improved design. Cultural evolution had begun. Innovation could now spread through learning in a single generation, rather than through genes over thousands of years. Fast forward to around 37,000 years ago. Modern humans had reached Europe, following coastlines and river valleys out of Africa. They spread across Asia and eventually into the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe, and in the caves of southern France and northern Spain, they left something extraordinary. Paintings that would wait in darkness for tens of thousands of years before being discovered. The cave paintings at Chauvet in France date back approximately 37,000 years, earlier than almost any other known figurative art. And they are not crude stick figures or simple markings. They are sophisticated representations of lions, horses, rhinoceroses, and mammoths, rendered with skill that would challenge many modern artists. The artistry is breathtaking even after tens of thousands of years. The artists understood perspective. They used the natural contours of the rock to create three-dimensional effects. They showed animals in motion, herds running, predators stalking. Some images were painted over hundreds of years, different generations adding their own contributions to what must have been a sacred space. These caves accumulated meaning over time. What were they doing? Why spend hours in the dark, deep underground, painting images that would rarely be seen? Some researchers believe these caves were places of ritual. Perhaps shamans communicated with the spirit world here. Others suggest they were teaching spaces where young hunters learned about the animals they would pursue. The caves may have served multiple purposes across generations. The honest answer is we do not know. These images were created by people with minds as complex as ours, but cultures so distant that their meanings may be lost forever. What we can say is that they were thinking symbolically, creating representations that meant something beyond their physical form. Lascaux, discovered in 1940, dates to approximately 17,000 years ago. Nearly 600 paintings cover the walls and ceilings, depicting horses, deer, aurochs, and bison with remarkable accuracy. Scientists have shown that these prehistoric artists depicted the walking gait of four-legged animals more accurately than many modern painters. They observed their subjects closely and rendered what they saw with precision. At Altamira in Spain, the ceiling of a lateral chamber is covered with polychrome paintings of bison, deer, and other animals. Dating reveals they are approximately 14,000 to 18,000 years old. When discovered in 1879, experts declared them modern forgeries. They could not believe prehistoric people capable of such artistry. It took decades before science accepted the truth. Cave paintings are only part of the story. Around 30,000 years ago, people across Europe and Asia began carving small figurines, mostly female forms with exaggerated features associated with fertility. The Venus of Willendorf, found in Austria, stands just over 4 inches tall, but represents something profound about prehistoric minds. Someone carved this with care and intention. Over 200 similar figurines have been found across a vast geographic range. From France to Siberia, they share certain characteristics, despite being separated by thousands of miles, often thousands of years apart in time as well. This suggests shared cultural traditions spanning the prehistoric world, ideas traveling across continents, along with the people who carried them. And then there is the music. In caves across southern Germany, archaeologists have found flutes made from bird bones and mammoth ivory. They date back approximately 43,000 years. These are not simple whistles. They have precisely placed finger holes that produce multiple notes on a recognizable scale. Someone understood acoustics well enough to engineer instruments. The 5-holed flute found at Hohlfels Cave has a V-shaped mouthpiece carved from the wing bone of a griffon vulture. It still produces notes today. Our ancestors were making music, perhaps gathering around fires to sing and play, perhaps using rhythm and melody in rituals. We can only imagine music echoed in caves tens of thousands of years ago. Some researchers believe music may have given modern humans a competitive advantage over Neanderthals. The ability to create and share music strengthens social bonds, helps coordinate group activities, and allows emotional expression that words alone cannot capture. Music may have helped us survive. Now let us step back and consider what life was actually like during these 100,000 years before history. Our ancestors lived as hunter-gatherers, moving across the landscape following seasonal food sources. A typical band might have included several families, perhaps 20 to 50 people who traveled and worked together, small enough to be flexible, large enough to be safe. They knew their territories intimately. Every edible plant, every water source, every cave that offered shelter from storms. This knowledge was passed down through generations. Accumulating wisdom about the natural world allowed them to survive in environments from tropical Africa to frozen Europe. Each generation added to the knowledge. Men typically hunted large game, developing sophisticated tracking techniques and cooperative strategies. They learned to read animal behavior, to predict migration patterns. They worked together in ways that amplified individual ability. A single human cannot bring down a mammoth. A coordinated group can. Cooperation was not optional. It was survival. Women gathered plant foods, which likely provided the majority of calories in most environments. Nuts, berries, roots, seeds. This was not simple collecting but sophisticated knowledge. Which plants were edible? When did they ripen? How should those needing preparation be processed? Survival required knowing the natural world intimately. A mistake could mean poison. Archaeological evidence suggests that prehistoric hunter-gatherers enjoyed relatively good health. Skeletal remains show they were tall, well-nourished, with good teeth. Their varied diets provided balanced nutrition. Their active lifestyles kept them physically fit. Life was hard, but it was not necessarily miserable. If you are starting to drift off, that is perfectly fine. These people are not going anywhere. They have been waiting in the archaeological record for tens of thousands of years. They will still be there when you wake up. Their mysteries intact, their stories slowly emerging from the earth. Rest well. The question that has puzzled researchers for decades is why civilization took so long to develop. If humans had modern brains 100,000 years ago, why did they wait 90,000 years to invent agriculture and start building cities? What were they doing all that time? One theory points to climate. For most of human prehistory, the planet cycled through ice ages and warm periods. Dramatic climate swings would have made agriculture difficult or impossible. You cannot plant crops when glaciers are advancing or when familiar plants are migrating to new regions. The environment was too unstable for farming. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, ice sheets covered much of North America and Europe. Sea levels dropped by over 400 feet. Vast areas of continental shelf were exposed. The climate was colder, drier, and far more challenging than today. Hunter-gatherer lifestyles actually make sense under these conditions. You cannot farm when the climate is unpredictable, but you can follow herds of migrating animals. You can gather whatever plants manage to grow. Flexibility was survival, and agriculture requires staying in one place. Then, around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age ended. The climate warmed and stabilized, and in a region called the Fertile Crescent, stretching from Egypt through Israel and Jordan to the Persian Gulf, something remarkable began. Humans began experimenting with a revolutionary new way of life. They started planting crops. Seeds that had been gathered could now be cultivated intentionally. The Neolithic Revolution, as archaeologists call it, changed everything. Instead of following food, humans could produce it. Instead of moving constantly, they could settle permanently. Instead of living in small bands, they could gather in villages and eventually cities. Population could grow exponentially. Everything accelerated. But here is the strange thing. Recent discoveries suggest that agriculture did not trigger civilization. It may have been the other way around. At a site called Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, archaeologists found massive stone temples built by hunter-gatherers approximately 11,000 years ago, before any evidence of farming in the region. This changed everything we thought we knew. These temples feature pillars up to 18 feet tall, carved with intricate reliefs of animals. Building them required hundreds of workers, coordinating their efforts over extended periods. This suggests complex social organization existed before agriculture, not because of it. The sequence we thought we knew was wrong. Perhaps religion or social ritual drove the development of complex societies. Perhaps the need to gather for ceremonies led people to settle near sacred sites, which eventually led to farming to support permanent populations. The old story of agriculture creating civilization may have the causation backwards. This brings us to one of the deepest mysteries of human prehistory. If our ancestors had modern brains for hundreds of thousands of years, why did it take so long for what we call civilization to emerge? Were they simply waiting for the right conditions, or was something else happening? Some researchers propose that population density was the key factor. Innovation spreads faster when more people interact. A lone genius in a band of 30 cannot change the world, but connect that genius to thousands of other minds, and ideas can compound and accumulate exponentially. Scale changes everything. Before agriculture, human populations were small and scattered. A good idea might spread through a local region, but vast distances and sparse populations limited how far it could travel. Ideas that seem obvious to us might have been independently invented and lost countless times before finally taking hold. Knowledge was fragile. Agriculture changed the equation. Farming could support far more people per square mile than hunting and gathering. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities. More people meant more ideas, more specialization, more accumulated knowledge. Cultural evolution accelerated dramatically. Within just a few thousand years of agriculture emerging, humans had invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, metallurgy, and complex government. Not because our brains had improved, but because our social networks had expanded to the point where innovation could compound upon itself. Writing emerged around 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Egypt. For the first time, knowledge could be stored outside human memory. Laws could be codified, transactions could be recorded, history could begin. Everything before that moment exists only in the mute testimony of artifacts. And that brings us back to the gap. 295,000 years of human existence before writing, countless generations of people who lived full lives, loved, struggled, wondered at the stars, and left almost no trace that they ever existed. What stories have we lost? What songs were sung around, fires that left no record? What philosophies were debated that were never written down? The gap is not just an absence of civilization, it is an absence of memory, a silence where voices once rang. Yet those people were not fundamentally different from us. The cave painters at Chauvet had the same cognitive capacity as Shakespeare or Einstein. The woman who wore shell beads at Blombos 75,000 years ago had thoughts and feelings as complex as yours or mine. She chose those shells deliberately. She or someone in her group spent time perforating them, stringing them together, deciding how they should look. She wore them for reasons that mattered to her, whether for beauty, for status, or for spiritual protection. She was human in every way that matters. Perhaps the real mystery is not why civilization took so long to develop, but why we assume it should have happened faster. Hunter-gatherer lifestyles sustained human populations for hundreds of thousands of years. They worked. They allowed people to live, to love, to create meaning. Archaeological studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies suggest they often worked fewer hours than agricultural or industrial people to meet their basic needs. They had more leisure time, richer social lives, greater equality between individuals. Progress is not a straight line from worse to better. For most of human history, there was no need to accumulate surplus, no drive to build permanent monuments, no pressure to record events for posterity. People lived in the present, passing knowledge through oral tradition, creating art that served immediate purposes, leaving the earth much as they found it. The transition to agriculture and civilization brought many benefits but also many costs. Farming created surplus that supported specialists and artists, but it also created inequality and warfare over resources. Cities enabled great achievements, but also diseases that spread rapidly through dense populations. Skeletal evidence shows that early farmers were often shorter and less healthy than the hunter-gatherers they replaced. Their teeth were worse from grain-heavy diets. Their bones showed signs of repetitive labor. Civilization demanded sacrifices from those who built it. But once started, there was no going back. Farming could support populations that hunting and gathering could not. Those larger populations needed organization, government, armies. The agricultural societies expanded, absorbing or displacing hunter-gatherers wherever they went. Within a few thousand years, almost all of humanity had transitioned to farming or been pushed to marginal environments. The 100,000-year experiment with hunting and gathering was over. A new chapter in human history had begun, and here we are today. 8 billion of us, transformed from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers into a globally connected civilization that has touched every corner of the planet and reached into space. All of this in just a few thousand years, after hundreds of thousands of years of relative stasis. What would those shell bead makers at Blombos think if they could see us now? Would they recognize us as kin? Would they understand what drove us to build these strange lives so different from theirs? Or would they wonder why we abandoned a way of life that worked for so long? The 100,000-year gap is not empty. It is filled with lives lived, lessons learned, cultures created and forgotten. Every person who lived during that time contributed to the genetic and cultural inheritance that eventually became us. We carry their legacy in our bones and our minds. Genetic studies show that all living humans descended from African populations that existed around 200,000 years ago. We are all cousins, all branches of the same family tree, all inheritors of cognitive abilities that evolved during those long millennia before history. The capacity for language, for symbolic thought, for art and music, these were forged during the 100,000-year gap. We did not invent civilization from nothing. We built it on cognitive foundations that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop. Every thought you have uses architecture shaped by that long history. Every child who learns to speak is using neural architecture shaped by countless generations of prehistoric ancestors. Every artist who creates is drawing on capacities developed long ago. In the minds of people who painted cave walls tens of thousands of years ago, we are the living memory of the gap. If you have made it this far and are still awake, thank you for traveling through time with me tonight. If you have drifted off somewhere along the way, these mysteries will be here when you return. They have been patient for 100,000 years. They can wait a little longer. New discoveries continue to push back our understanding of when human minds became truly modern. Every year brings new evidence from caves and dig sites around the world. The picture is far from complete, but it grows richer with each passing season. Just last year, researchers announced the discovery of what may be the oldest known engraved art, a zigzag pattern scratched into a shell from Java dating back over 500,000 years. If confirmed, this would mean symbolic behavior existed even before modern humans evolved. The story keeps expanding. Neanderthals, once dismissed as brutish and primitive, now appear to have created art, buried their dead with ritual, and possibly even made music. The cognitive revolution may have roots far deeper than we ever imagined. What made modern humans different was perhaps not raw intelligence, but the ability to connect minds across vast social networks. Our ancestors developed culture that could accumulate faster than genetics could change. That gave us the edge that eventually led to civilization. But civilization is fragile. History is full of societies that rose, flourished, and collapsed, their achievements forgotten until archaeologists rediscovered them. The Bronze Age civilizations we explored in an earlier video fell so completely that even their existence was forgotten. The 100,000-year gap reminds us that the way we live now is not the only way to be human. For most of our existence, we live differently in smaller groups, in closer connection with the natural world, without writing or cities or technology beyond what we could carry. That world is not entirely lost. A handful of hunter-gatherer societies have survived into the modern era, offering windows into ways of life that were once universal. the San people of southern Africa, the Sentinelese of the Andaman Islands, others scattered across remote regions. These are not living fossils frozen in time. They are contemporary people who have chosen or been forced to maintain traditional lifestyles, but they demonstrate that the human mind can find meaning and fulfillment through ways of life very different from our own. As you drift towards sleep tonight, consider what it means to be the inheritor of 100,000 years of human experience. Your brain was shaped by ancestors who survived ice ages and volcanic winters, who created art in dark caves and music on bone flutes. They gave you the capacity for language that lets you understand these words, the ability to imagine places you have never been and times you have never lived, the creative spark that makes music and art possible. These are not modern inventions. They are ancient inheritances. The 100,000-year gap is not a void. It is the crucible where humanity was forged. Every struggle, every triumph, every small innovation that spread through prehistoric populations contributed to making us who we are. We stand on the shoulders of countless forgotten generations. And the story continues. We are still evolving, not biologically in any meaningful sense, but culturally, our capacity for innovation has only accelerated. What seemed like impossibly slow progress for 100,000 years has become exponential change within just a few centuries. Whether that is good or bad depends on choices we make as a species. The same minds that painted Chauvet and carved the Venus of Willendorf now split atoms and sequence genomes. The question is whether we will use those capabilities wisely. For now, the stars still shine as they did for our ancestors. The same moon rises over African savannas and European caves, and wherever you are watching this tonight, we are connected to those prehistoric people by unbroken chains of descent and culture. The gap before history was not wasted time. It was the time it took to become truly human, to develop the cognitive and social capabilities that eventually enabled everything we have built. Those ancestors were not waiting for civilization. They were creating the conditions for it, and perhaps most importantly, they were living, loving their children, mourning their dead, looking up at stars, and wondering what lay beyond, creating beauty that still moves us tens of thousands of years later, being human in all the ways that matter most. So as sleep approaches, know that you are not alone across time. Billions of humans have lived and died before you, most leaving no written record, but all contributing to the story of our species. You are part of that story, its latest chapter, but certainly not its last. The 100,000-year gap holds mysteries we may never fully solve. What songs were sung? What stories told? What philosophies developed and lost before writing could preserve them? These questions remain, inviting curiosity and humility about what we cannot know. But what we have discovered paints a picture of remarkable creativity and resilience. Our ancestors were not primitives marking time until civilization arrived. They were fully human, living lives of meaning and purpose in ways adapted to their circumstances. The shell beads and bone flutes, the cave paintings and carved figurines. These are not just artifacts. They are messages from people who lived and died without knowing that anyone would ever find their traces. They created beauty anyway, just as we do. The shell beads and bone flutes, the cave paintings and carved figurines, these are not just artifacts. They are messages from people who lived without knowing anyone would find their traces. Every dig site reveals new complexity, new evidence of human creativity that we never suspected. The story keeps expanding. Hunting strategies became more sophisticated during the Middle Stone Age in Africa. Humans began targeting specific species with specialized weapons. Hafted weapons appeared, where stone points were attached to wooden shafts with plant fibers or animal sinew. This required mastering multiple technologies simultaneously. Stoneworking, woodworking, and binding materials all had to be understood. The whole was greater than the sum of its parts. These compound tools extended human capabilities beyond biological limits. A thrown spear could bring down game from a safe distance. This reduced the risk of injury from large animals and allowed humans to exploit prey that was previously too dangerous to approach. Evidence from South African caves shows humans exploiting marine resources at least 165,000 years ago. Shellfish, fish bones, and seabird remains appear in archaeological deposits. This maritime adaptation may have been crucial during harsh climate periods. When inland resources became scarce, coastal environments offered reliable protein. The coastal route may have helped modern humans spread out of Africa. The out-of-Africa migration likely happened in waves over tens of thousands of years. Modern humans reached Australia by at least 50,000 years ago, requiring ocean crossings even during lower sea levels. Think about what that means. Humans built or lashed together vessels capable of surviving open water crossings. They planned expeditions to destinations they could not see. They took the risk of venturing into unknown territory. This required imagination and courage, as well as technical skill. When modern humans reached Australia, they encountered a continent full of megafauna, giant animals that had never faced human hunters before. Within a few thousand years, most of these species were extinct. The Diprotodon, a wombat-like creature the size of a rhinoceros, vanished. This pattern repeated wherever modern humans went. In the Americas, mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths disappeared shortly after human arrival. Our ancestors were apex predators like the world had never seen. But the extinction story is more complex than simple overkill. Climate changes at the end of the last ice age stressed megafauna populations. Human hunting may have been the final push for populations already in decline. The relationship between humans and their environment was dynamic and complex. Our ancestors actively modified it in ways that accumulated over tens of thousands of years. Fire was used to manage landscapes long before agriculture. Burning forests created grasslands that attracted game animals. Regular burning prevented fuel buildup that could lead to catastrophic wildfires. Indigenous Australians practiced this for tens of thousands of years. The Australian landscape that European colonizers encountered was not wilderness. It had been actively managed by humans for over 50,000 years. The ecosystem had adapted to regular burning. This challenges our assumptions about prehistory. Our ancestors were active agents shaping their environments. The line between hunter-gatherer and farmer may be less clear than we once thought. Recent evidence suggests humans were manipulating wild plant populations long before full agriculture emerged, burning to encourage useful plants, transplanting wild species, creating conditions that favored edible plants. At the Ohalo II site in Israel, archaeologists found evidence that humans processed wild cereals over 23,000 years ago, grinding stones with plant residues and burned seeds. The foundations of agriculture were laid long before the Neolithic. The transition to full agriculture was a gradual intensification of practices that had existed for thousands of years. Hunter-gatherers knew which plants were edible and how to process them. Farming formalized this knowledge. The Natufian culture in the Levant, dating from about 15,000 to 11,000 years ago, shows people settling down before they started farming. They built permanent stone structures, buried their dead in cemeteries, and invested in place in ways their ancestors had not. Natufian burials show elaborate rituals. Bodies were adorned with shell beads and gazelle toe bones. Some skulls were removed and buried separately, suggesting ancestor veneration or other ritual practices. Complex beliefs about death and afterlife had developed. The Natufians made heavy stone grinding equipment that would have been difficult to transport. This investment in non-portable technology shows they expected to stay. Settlement came first, and intensified food production followed to support growing populations in fixed locations. The dog may have been our first domestic animal, joining human camps perhaps 15,000 years ago or earlier. Dogs helped with hunting, provided protection, and offered companionship. They co-evolved with us, their brains changing to better read human social cues. The domestication of dogs shows that our ancestors understood animal behavior well enough to selectively breed for desired traits over many generations. This is applied genetics. Even if they did not understand the underlying mechanisms, they knew that offspring resembled parents. Pottery appears in the archaeological record around 20,000 years ago in East Asia. Long before agriculture, early ceramics were not cooking vessels but figurines, perhaps used in rituals. Pottery represents a transformation of materials, using fire to permanently change clay into ceramic. This is chemistry. Understanding that heat creates irreversible changes. The same principle would eventually lead to metallurgy. Language made this accumulation possible. Without the ability to communicate complex ideas, knowledge would die with each individual. Language allowed experience to compound across generations, each building on what came before. We cannot know when fully modern language emerged. Anatomical evidence suggests our vocal apparatus was capable of complex speech by at least 100,000 years ago. But the capacity for language may have developed gradually over a much longer period. The FOXP2 gene, associated with language ability in modern humans, shows evidence of recent evolutionary selection. Changes to this gene may have enhanced our capacity for the rapid, complex articulation that language requires. Biology and culture evolve together. Modern genetics has revealed surprising connections between present and past. Neanderthal DNA persists in non-African populations today, evidence of interbreeding between our ancestors and other human species. We carry genetic memories of encounters tens of thousands of years old. Denisovan DNA appears in Asian and especially Oceanian populations, inherited from interbreeding with another human species we know, mainly from a single finger bone found in a Siberian cave. Our ancestors met and mixed with human relatives who are now extinct. These genetic exchanges may have been advantageous. Tibetans carry a Denisovan gene variant that helps them survive at high altitude. Some Neanderthal genes may enhance immune function. Our mixed heritage contributed to human adaptability. The 100,000-year gap was not a period of isolation. Human populations mixed, separated, and mixed again. Ideas flowed between groups through trade, intermarriage, and cultural contact. The genetic diversity of modern humans reflects this complex history. Trade networks existed long before civilization. Obsidian, a volcanic glass ideal for making sharp tools, was transported hundreds of miles from its sources. Shells from coastlines appeared far inland. People were connected across vast distances. These trade networks moved more than materials. They moved ideas. A new technique developed in one region could spread along trade routes to distant areas. Innovation was not isolated, but connected, even if the connections moved slowly by modern standards. The 100,000-year gap saw the development of regional cultural traditions that would eventually become the foundation for later civilizations. Different groups developed different approaches to the same challenges, creating diversity that enriched human experience. In some regions, people developed elaborate burial practices that reveal beliefs about death and afterlife. In others, artistic traditions flourished that produced distinctive styles. Human culture was diversifying even as it accumulated. The Sungir site in Russia, dating to approximately 34,000 years ago, contained burials so elaborate they suggest complex social hierarchies. One grave held a man adorned with nearly 3,000 mammoth ivory beads, each requiring hours to make. These beads represented perhaps tens of thousands of hours of labor. Their presence in a grave suggests either extreme personal wealth or that many people contributed to honoring the deceased. Either interpretation points to complex social organization. Two children buried at the same site were even more elaborately adorned, suggesting that high status could be inherited rather than earned. Social stratification, which we associate with civilization, may have roots reaching deep into the prehistoric past. As your eyes grow heavy and sleep approaches, consider how much of what makes us human was forged during this vast prehistoric period. Our capacity for art and music, our complex social structures, our ability to adapt to any environment, the cognitive foundations that allow you to understand language, to imagine the past, to wonder about your ancestors. These were developed over countless generations during the 100,000-year gap. Your mind is a product of that long development, and the story continues to unfold. Every archaeological discovery adds new pieces to the puzzle. Every genetic study reveals new connections. The picture of our prehistoric ancestors grows clearer with each passing year. Yet mystery remains at the heart of it all. We will never know the names of those who painted Chauvet, who carved the Venus figurines, who made music on bone flutes. Their individual stories are lost, even as their collective legacy shapes everything we are. Perhaps that is as it should be. They lived their lives fully, without concern for how history would remember them. They loved and struggled and created beauty without any expectation of permanence, and yet their traces survived against all odds. Sleep well tonight, knowing you are part of a story much longer than any individual life. The 100,000-year gap is not a void in human history. It is the foundation upon which everything else was built, including you. Tomorrow, the mysteries will still be there, patient as always. The ancestors will wait, as they have waited for countless generations, for another night when we might explore what they left behind in their long journey toward becoming us.